Hughesy, World Rugby must introduce a law for players playing in other countries to be able to play for their home nations. It's getting silly now. And the reason I touch point on this is not as a New Zealander who's just disappointed that half of his All Blacks have left, but as a man who's living in England, seeing half of the English team leave the home of rugby to arch rivals France to play footy in France has me questioning World Rugby and just the way it's set up at the moment.
I've got a quick counterpoint here. Are you not just upset because you were no longer eligible to play for the All Blacks? Is that where this is coming from? Are you worried about your own career prospects? You're now living in England.
There could be a chance I end up getting an ancestry visa, and then I could be donning the white jersey. No,
there you go.
Which I would never do. So let's just start with that point. But I am. I can't play for the All Blacks right now, which it seems a little bit ridiculous. What have I had? An all-time great 30? Like 30 might be my peak. You never know. I'm about to turn 30, and it might be the way.
30 is a good age. 30 is a good age. You know, it's like, you know, me and you, Luke, we're like fine wine. We just get better as we age. Like, arguably, we are better now than we were when we started doing this show. You know, so it's just like that.
And that could happen to me, but I can't play for the All Blacks. But on a serious note, Hughesy, like you.
I mean, I'm not. If you're looking for argument from my end, you're not going to get it. I mean, Australia is a case in point of this, and you know we've seen that some of our. I mean, if you look at the last World Cup, one of our best players was Will Skelton, who does not live in Australia, does not play for a Super Rugby team. Right. Another one of our very best players was Marika Koroibete, who again doesn't live play in Australia. Yes, I am in full agreement with you. For as long as there is pay disparity between the different leagues and nations of the world, there is going to need to be a counterbalancing. So, you know, it is one of the things that I like about rugby and a lot of other sports is the idea of salary cap and the idea of fairness, right? Where it's not just the cashed up big teams that can win. Everyone's got an equal chance unless you're the Roosters and you've got a salary sombrero, and Uncle Nick is doing shady deals with paper bags, Melbourne Storm as well. But that, again, that cheating is so heinously viewed by the sports world for good reason, because we all love competition. That's why we're into sports at the end of the day, right? Sports is competition. We love watching it, being part of it, talking about it. It is competition. And what makes competition better is when it's fair, when, there's always going to be advantage and disadvantage, but when you level the playing field so much that you have to not only have the talent, but you have to have the smarts to overcome your disadvantages and play to your advantages, strengths. So when you have a situation like what we've got in World Rugby, where France and Japan are the two cashed up rugby nations, and that's where the talent is going because they need to, they sacrifice in their bodies. They want to be compensated for it. And I have no issue with the players doing that, right? That is absolutely within their right. And you would be silly to discourage them for doing that, particularly given some of the long-term injuries we've seen from rugby and other contact sports, right? You know, you need to support yourself, you need to support your family, you want to give them a life of comfort. Often these people as well have got several family members they're supporting, both immediate and extended. Some of them, like we know with a lot of Fijian heritage players or Polynesian heritage players, they've got families back in other countries like Fiji, Tonga, Samoa. They're supporting and helping to bring to some of these other countries as well. And all of that costs money, right? And they have the opportunity to do that and to make a better life for themselves and for their family. And it's a great thing that rugby does, is help them achieve those dreams. The counterbalance to it is that they should still be allowed to pay for their nation, right? If France and Japan are attracting all this talent that's going away from these other countries, those countries are not going to be able to field as strong a national team as possible, which is disappointing. And that doesn't benefit anyone when it comes to World Cup time, when it comes to international competition time. Like, we want to see the best teams, the best players out there on the field, right? And that's what it should be. So yes, I am in full agreement that World Rugby should introduce a law to allow players playing in other countries to play for their home nation. Now, the specifics of it, that's where I think we get into contention.
Yes. Yeah. What I'm assuming you're about to say you'd put a limit or a cap note onto it. Is that correct?
I think you would. I'm torn here because I'm sort of 50-50 on it. I think though it has to be consistent whatever you decide to do. I think it can't be one rule for one country and a different rule for a different country. I think every nation needs to be bound by the same rules. Now, I think you could do something where the cap is. Now, last time we had this discussion, I suggested a cap of 6 players. I actually think it should be more than that now. I think you've got a 23-man squad essentially, with 30 extended squad. Let's say, I think that it should be 10 or 11 could be from another nation. So that's half of your 23-man squad. More than half of that has to be residing in your home nation. That way, there is still a bit of a preference given, maybe, to some of the players playing the home nation. I guess what it is that at that point, all of your superstars that are playing overseas, you're going to bring into your squad. You're going to have plenty of spots to bring them into the squad, right? But let's say then you're tossing up between, say, like a backup lock, one of whom plays in France, one of whom plays in Australia. You probably lean more towards the Australian-based player in that instance. Not wanting superstars, but a depth piece, right? And in that way, that depth piece gets valuable exposure to international level, valuable exposure to the highest level of play, and they can develop and bring those skills back into the home competition. So that's my argument for a cap. I think it should be far more than the 3 that Australia currently has set, or the absolute zero tolerance that other nations have. I don't know if I'd go limitless cap, though.
I'm going to argue that point right now. And my ideology has changed over time. Like 5 years ago would have been like, New Zealand cannot allow international players to play rugby. Rah.
When the players started leaving.
And then, well, we get this every World Cup. But this one hurt even more. But now I look at it and I go, I'm seeing Super Rugby, especially 2 players, I think I made a post recently, who lead statistical categories who had played for Super Rugby teams over in the URC, are leading the Champions Cups with Josh Mackay for Glasgow leading, and I've forgotten his name for Munster, but if I remember it, I'll shout out. Both of them had played for the Super Rugby teams, and then I've gone overseas. And my thing is, it's going to take a brave coach to select them over someone who's in Super Rugby currently. Like, you've got to be a brave coach to select someone completely new. So my thinking is, even if you had a cap or didn't have a cap, like, only the superstars are going to come back. And there's also that argument of, they should have 50, games for that country. Like the World Guinea had to play 60 or whatever it was with the Kiddo law for Australia, or like 5 years of service. And I just think you're going to be a brave coach selecting someone to debut who plays for a France or something like that. It'll happen, and eventually, and we see like teams like Fiji, like you said, who have to do it. Like if a player's gunning it over in France, they're going to select them. But for an All Black, it just feels like the natural progression still will be Super Rugby, All Blacks, get your name up in the lights, you're an All Black, sign the big deal. So I don't see why there's a point to even hold a cap, because allow those players to go, and if they go, they're already risking their opportunity at a black jersey. You're not saying it's not a thing, but I just think you look at someone like Nick White, Dave Porticki, who went overseas, came back as better rugby players, and then get selected. Like, I just feel like actually being in and around the home teams or the Super Rugby teams or teams in your country. If you think about England, Owen Farrell still would get selected. Henry Ardell questions will still be up in the air because you've got local wingers putting their hands up. He hasn't proven himself on the England stage. Things like that, I go, there's still this, I think there will still be for a long time this, what league are they playing in? And I think you look at English football and how many of them don't play in the Premier League. It's a big selection to not select someone playing in the Premier League. Now, that's obviously the Premier League, the number one league. But yeah, I just think you open it up because I don't think there'll be that big of an issue. I think coaches will be reluctant to select a debutant from overseas unless they're setting the world alight.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And look, maybe my cap number is so large that it would really make little difference. I think you just have to think about it though, that you're sort of thinking it from a New Zealand perspective, I guess, like where Super Rugby is is a bright lights stage for New Zealand rugby. Like it matters in New Zealand more than it matters in Australia, I think. Right? So I think there's a difference for an Australian coach when they're looking at people. I think it's more of a level playing field, players that play in Super Rugby as compared to playing in overseas leagues. And you look at a number of the smaller nations, well, like your Fiji, like your island nations, even places like Japan or Portugal, tier 2, tier 3 nations, Georgia, right? They don't all have local competitions, but we would like them to. We would like them to start building those up, right? And so I think it's because it's beyond just Super Rugby. It's when we're considering World Rugby doing this, we've got to consider other leagues around the world as well. And so I think there is still a benefit to making sure you do include some local players in that mix. And when I say local players, I mean that play in the domestic competition, because I think then they bring that experience back to the domestic competition after having rubbed shoulders with their players from their country that have been good enough to go and play overseas, right? So I think there is a benefit to retaining some of that local talent at a long-term look at things. Now, again, this is a sort of highly theoretical discussion about how this works, and it is also about long-term rugby strategy as well as short-term immediate competition strategy. So there's a few different ways to look at it in that regard as well. I think if you're talking about just what is best for the next competition that comes up, then yeah, I think no cap is the most beneficial. But if you're looking at what's going to be best for the next 2 or 3 World Cups, then I think that's where you have to take a bit more of a long-term view and say, yeah, look, we will have a big cap, but you are required to have some of your players, a percentage of your players from your domestic competition or equivalent. There are some nations out there that don't have that domestic competition, but for like your Australia and stuff like that, I think that's where it probably comes into the mix a bit
You
more.
think you'd probably make it start off, especially with tier 1 nations. I think you'd be targeting with the rule first. But it's a very good point. Like, I'm definitely thinking, I think, narrow-minded a little bit with the future and hold. Because as I say, at the moment, you're going to be a brave coach to select a debutant from overseas. But again, I look at it in Australia's point of view, and I was like, is it Jack Dempsey, the Scottish Australian, who came out of the blue, was very good in the back row. All of a sudden, wouldn't have you loved to be able to pick him even to debut because he's killing it over there? I think, if you open up to 10, 11 spots, you're still risking it with, is a coach willing to take a shot on a debutant? Whereas I think if you open up fully, it'll be a great story for some of those players, I just think. But it is an interesting point, and it's one of those ones that I would love to see the stats on a team like South Africa and go, in all their games, break it down by percentage, how many players are actually based out of South Africa or based out of the URC teams or the Super Rugby teams, and how much are based away, and go, where is this good number if we do put a cap on it? Like South Africa have shown, they've got obviously an unlimited law, but they haven't just selected players from outside of South Africa. They've obviously have still got some players playing in the URC and stuff like that. So it'd be very interesting, I think, to see that.
100%.
Let us know what you think. Let us know in the comments if you think that World Rugby need to do this, if there needs to be a cap. For now, thank you for joining us on that Rugby podcast, part 1 of this episode. We will talk to you again soon. Cheers.
Peace.